back for part two with our interview with Jonathan Ornstein, director of the JCC. We're going to stay in Kazimierz, but we're going to move away from the JCC. Jonathan, Kazimierz today, full of touristy golf carts, stag parties, nightlife, I guess, generally. Do you think this is in any way, inconsistent or kind of disrespectful of certain aspects of the cultural heritage of Kazimierz? Does it fit, in other words, the touristy aspect of things?
I don't mind the tourism. I don't mind really the golf carts and things like that. I mean, there are certain things which personally I find distasteful, but I don't think that it's a problem or it's disrespectful to the history of the Jewish quarter. I think was the Jewish quarter, and I think it still is the Jewish quarter. And I appreciate that so much of the city's nightlife and so much of the cafes and so much of the cultures and good restaurants are in Kazimierz. I think it's positive.
Let's go a little bit bigger picture here. Let's talk about Auschwitz for a moment. Auschwitz, I saw some numbers recently. I think there was something like 1.5 or 1.6 million visitors last year.
I think it's even higher. I think it's over 2.
Is it closer?
I think it's over 2. Yeah.
Okay, let's say whatever I was reading was a little bit out of date. Maybe it's a lot, and this is a major tourist destination, and it sounds awkward even saying that when in the context of Auschwitz. It's hard to find the right words. When you go there as a visitor, the first thing you see is a big parking lot. I think the next thing you see is a little restaurant, public bathrooms. It's a jarring experience for a lot of people who don't know what to expect. What are your thoughts on the kind of again, hard to find the right words, the mainstreaming of Auschwitz as a tourist destination? Is something being lost?
I think it's positive. I think that, if imagine if that weren't the case. Imagine if they made no effort to help people visit Auschwitz, then people would be saying, aha, the Poles are trying to hide Auschwitz. So I think it's positive. At the end of the day, the Auschwitz State Museum, Auschwitz-Birkenau, is a site of Polish martyrdom and, of course, a site of Jewish martyrdom. And I think the Poles have, to some degree, the same desire and the same interest that we on the Jewish side do, which is we want people to go there to visit. We want them to learn about the Nazi atrocities. We want them to to celebrate to commemorate the victims, celebrate the heroes who did what they could and survived, and learn the lessons. Make sure it doesn't happen to the Jews or to anybody else ever again. So I mean, I'm not bothered by those things. I don't think that that's some line. I'm sure there are lines, I believe, but I don't think that they've been crossed. And I think that you have the fact of, whatever the number is, over 2 million visitors a year going to Auschwitz. I think it's very positive. I think those are 2 million people who understand the need to help make the world a more tolerant place based on what they've seen in Auschwitz.
Auschwitz has a connection to the next subject I want to ask you about. This is something that's been in the news quite a lot recently, very controversial. Call it the Polish death camp controversy. Just a quick word of explanation for anybody listening who's not familiar with this. Over the last couple of years, the frequency with which different media outlets used this term, Polish death camps, seemed to increase. And the current Polish government, the Law and Justice Party, they seem to kind of have a more intense and a louder reaction when it happened in the media than the previous government maybe. But anyway, it just seemed that this kind of a perfect storm came together. It was used more often, the government reacted in a stronger way. And as anyone knows, this term is, it's inaccurate. These are not Polish death camps. They're on Polish soil. Then you can get into the argument of whether or not Poland existed as a sovereign nation at the time. It's complicated, and it resulted in a new law from the Polish government that will punish people. I forgot what the exact punishment is.
I think it's
exactly.
up to 3 years. Up to 3 years in prison.
3 years in prison for using the term Polish death camp. So, what's your take on the use of the term, the new law that's being introduced, and just the controversy generally?
Well, I think there's no reasonable people say Polish death camps. We understand that the camps were conceived of and operated by the Germans in the ones we're talking about here, in occupied Poland. So that's not even a question about the veracity of using the term Polish death camps. The problem with this law is that it doesn't exactly say that. It says that the Polish nation cannot be held complicit for what happened. Part of the law, there's a few elements of it, but the part that really is the controversial part says that the Polish nation cannot be held responsible for what happened during the Holocaust. And the issue there is that it's written in very imprecise wording. So nobody understands what it means, the Polish nation. Poland from 1939 to 1945 didn't exist. There was a government in exile, but there was what was happening on the ground here on Polish soil certainly wasn't directed by any Polish government. So the idea of a nation is an imprecise legal term, and people are afraid that that can be taken to stifle any sort of discussion and say, well, what if I talk about what individual Poles did in the forest to if I have a story, there were good Poles that helped Jews and there were bad Poles who hurt Jews. And if people tell the story of those who turned Jews in or who murdered Jews, then maybe that could be seen as impugning the good name of the Polish nation. So I think that the problem arose about this bill because of the very imprecise wording.
Would you agree that maybe in today's world, with the exception of maybe some fringe lunatic elements, it's hard to imagine any media outlet using that term, Polish death camps, with malicious intent, by accident possibly, but isn't it hard to imagine anyone would use it in the way that the law intends to punish?
Absolutely. And I think, again, the problem with the law is that it doesn't mention the term Polish death camps. If the law said it's illegal to willfully use the term Polish death camps, we'd probably say, I would say from an American point of view, I believe in more free speech. I don't necessarily see the need for a law, but I wouldn't have a problem so much with that law because it wouldn't be something that could be used and could be interpreted in a bad way. The issue really is that the law doesn't talk about Polish death camps, and Poland gets very upset about the term Polish death camps. I think sometimes for native English speakers, it's hard for us to understand because Polish, it's a different structure, is structured very differently than English in terms of the grammar. And for example, in English, if you talk about a New York deli, it could be a New York style deli in Krakow or in Timbuktu, or it could be, for example, a Korean deli in New York City. Because in English, sometimes the adjective is an adjective describing the noun, and sometimes it's a locative describing where it is. In Polish, the adjective is never a locative. When the Poles hear Polish death camp, they don't hear what we hear, which is maybe it was run by Poland or maybe it was located in Poland. They only hear that it was conceived of and run by Poles. And that's why Poles, in the last few years, have reacted so strongly when they hear the term Polish death camp. But again, this law doesn't specifically make it a crime to use the term Polish death camp.
It must be, on a personal level, just a little bit frustrating to see a bit of backslide in the tremendous progress that the two nations of Israel and Poland, with Polish historians and Israeli historians working together to produce these fabulous museums, centers of learning. It just seems like such an avoidable controversy.
Absolutely. I mean, from in the sense of the Polish-Israeli connection, Poland and Israel, but there's a great, very, very strong partnership and very strong relationship between Poland and Israel. I would say that Poland and the Czech Republic are the two best friends of Israel in Europe, and Israel has, in the last few years, has started to understand that, and that there are very, very deep ties. In the first Knesset, in the first Parliament of Israel, over half of the members were native speakers of Polish. So wow. There's such a strong tie. The Polish Jews are really the ones who are very instrumental in building the country, and there's great ties on every level, for the diplomatic level, cultural level, all different cooperation in terms of tourism. The number I just saw, the increase in tourism last year from Israel was 50% increase. Wow. So massive connection between the two countries, and it's a shame if something like this bill gets in the way, because I think it's in the interest of Israel and the interest of Poland to have that type of partnership. And from our point of view, from the Jewish point of view, not only separating it a little from Israel, absolutely, we've made tremendous progress. The Jewish world, Jews around the world, have started to understand that Poland is not only a place of tragedy, it's not only a place of Jewish history, but it's once again a place of Jewish life, and really a place of thriving, colorful, optimistic Jewish life. And then when a law like this comes along, and then you have a lot of bad words on every side, then people start to believe, start to once again fall into those stereotypes and start to see Poland as purely a place of anti-Semitism, and it hurts. It's very damaging and threatens what we're doing at the JCC.
It feels like a overreaction to a non-problem with a vague law.
Straw man kind of thrown up for absolutely, ridiculous reasons. It kind of, because I've followed your interviews down the years, John, you've always been so consistent in making that point. This is a very friendly place for the Jewish community. They've never faced any serious issues, and it's something to be celebrated rather than denigrated.
Absolutely, and it's a bit of a shame, but I think that the Polish government has come to understand in the last 4 or 5 months that the law is damaging and it's not good for anybody. It's not good for Poland. It's not good for any of their the relationships that they have around the world. Certainly the relationship with the United States government. I've met with United States government officials who are also absolutely displeased with the law. And you might think if Poland doesn't care that much about Israel, although they do, or with the Jewish community, but certainly the Polish government is very aware of how important their friendship and partnership is with the United States, especially with looking what's happening on the, to our east with Putin. So I'm very confident that the law, for all different reasons, and maybe also because it's the right thing to do, but I think for the real politic as well of it, I think that the law will be amended. I'm optimistic.
I hope so too.
Recently over the last, let's say, 2 or 3 years, in the American media, the European media, there's a steady stream of profiles about the political situation in Poland that invariably make references to Hungary as well, are always kind of paired together. And they kind of give the impression, sometimes not so subtly, that the rights of minorities are threatened, there's some kind of dark cloud on the horizon, something bad is coming. That's the tone. First of all, would you agree? And if so, where is this coming from? What's the basis for this?
There are worries. Up until this bill passed in January, when people asked me how I felt as a Jew living in Poland, I'd say, well, to be honest, I'm more worried about it as a Polish citizen. There are certain laws which are happening. The government has taken certain steps to curtail the freedom of the media. Certain issues with women's rights, things that I have problems with as a Polish citizen, but not necessarily directly affect me as a Jew. I think, generally speaking, when you have sort of nationalism and populism are never long term going to be good for minorities in a country. And I think even whether it affects us or directly affects us now as Jews, I think that there are storm clouds on the horizon, and I think that. When we look at Hungary, most people I know that look at Hungary see a problem and something to avoid that type of situation. And sometimes this government, and I think it was Kaczynski, looked toward Hungary as a model of what you can do. And I think that should be very, very worrisome for everybody, certainly not only for Jews.
Dave mentioned a minute ago that in previous interviews that you've given, you kind of give a positive picture of the situation of Jews in Poland. It always emphasizes the fact that your JCC, for example, is very open. There's no security guard. There's no barriers. Anybody's welcome. The door is literally always open.
Well, there's some security measures. They're just not as visible as they are in other places.
Okay, true. That's fine. But what I mean is that it's a friendlier, more welcoming situation than elsewhere. Let's say
absolutely.
Yeah? The Jewish community doesn't necessarily face the threats or the problems that they might elsewhere. And you say this again and again and again to media outlets that are maybe looking for a different answer to that question. And yet that narrative, the narrative that you're pushing, as Poland is a friendly place for Jews, doesn't seem to take hold and get promoted. Why do you think that is?
Well, I'm not sure. I think that it does. If we look at the starting point in terms of what I see, I travel a lot. I'm traveling all around the world, especially around the U.S., and I speak to a lot of people who may not have visited Poland, and they start out with a certain opinion, and then learning about what we're doing, I think that it changes their minds. And we've had hundreds of thousands of visitors. I think I mentioned over 100,000, 120,000 in 2017, who come in and they experience this open Jewish community center, which I think unique in Europe. On our fence, it has a sign that says "Stop by and say hi," which is not the message of most Jewish communities today, unfortunately, that feel they need to build higher walls around themselves to protect themselves.
It's like a bunker mentality sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that, we talk about the message getting through. I think the message absolutely is getting through. And I see a tremendous change in terms of when we opened 10 years ago or even 5-6 years ago to now, that I think the world has started to understand that Poland is a place of Jewish life. I think maybe paradoxically a little bit is as other countries in Europe have continued to become more difficult places for Jews, then maybe Poland sort of looks better by default as we see what's happened in, recently in Paris and in Brussels and things we understand, and in Denmark We understand that there are Jewish communities that are really under threat, and that we don't have the luxury of saying, "Oh, Poland, bad things happened in Poland a long time ago," even though and it's good today, but we're going to hold on to those old visions of Poland.
So it's kind of like their default setting, so to speak. They kind of assume Poland still has certain attitudes that kind of. And then they're surprised to learn that it's the opposite.
Absolutely, people. I think that visiting our center from a Jewish perspective, people that don't know, it's a transformative experience for them, seeing Jewish life thriving the way it is, with Jews and non-Jews working together.
I'd like to change topic a little bit, because as great as these heavyweight political subjects are, I'm very interested, Jonathan, in your own journey. You leave Queens, New York. You were a law student at the time, I think I read. And you end up in Israel for 12 months. Tell me what happens from there and your experiences. I'm really curious about your experience of living in Israel.
Well, I moved to Israel somewhat accidentally. It was getting cold in New York. I had a year off. I thought it would be a little warmer, so I went.
Good reason.
Exactly. I went to a kibbutz in Israel, which is sort of a communal living type situation. I fell in love with this type of life, and I decided to become an Israeli citizen. So I did that. And I went to the army for a couple of years, which was interesting. I was a little bit older than the other people. I was 28 when I went in and did a couple of years. So that was very interesting. But it was in an optimistic time with Israel, with sort of in the peace process from 98 to 2000. So it was a good feeling at that point. And we thought that
been tough though. You're in a desert. It's very hot, I'm assuming, and you get that full pack on. I mean, that must have been intense, dude. I mean,
you wanted to get away from the cold. You got it.
I know. I got away from the cold. Absolutely. But it was a very intense situation. But it was a good learning experience. I think doing the you felt it's a very special feeling when you think about the history of the Jewish people, and you think of a couple of thousand years of anti-Semitism and sort of being disconnected from their homeland, to be able to be a soldier and feel like you're defending that homeland, especially at a time when you felt that peace was right around the corner. It was an interesting time to be there, and I thought it was overall a good experience. So after I finished the army, I was back on this kibbutz, deciding whether I would stay or maybe move to Tel Aviv or something, and I met a Polish woman from Łódź. Non-Jewish woman who was a volunteer learning, interested in kibbutz life, and I fell in love and decided to pick up sight unseen and move to Poland. So I came here in 2001. I was in Łódź for a year, wasn't necessarily that happy in Łódź, and I got a job in Krakow teaching Hebrew at the Department of Jewish Studies in 2002. So I moved down here then. Then we broke up, and I just fell in love with Krakow, and I stayed, and I've been here for 16 years in Krakow.
And just to touch on as well, the kibbutz is a fascinating setup concept. It's kind of the second wave of Israeli settlers, where more it was kind of a liberal labor initiative. Could you maybe just give our listeners a flavor of what it's like living in a kibbutz, the day to day of it, and how it affected you? Because I would imagine I knew some people when I was younger that used to travel there from Ireland, and they always talked about it like it was a really life-changing experience.
Yeah, no, it was. Kibbutz is fascinating. I think, sadly, in Israel, you don't have that many of the kibbutzes that are still in the sort of old school way that we think about it. But my kibbutz, ironically, because it was pretty well off kibbutz, because they had a product that they sold in the capitalist market of Israel, was able to maintain the ideology. So generally on the kibbutz, people come together, they start the communal sort of living thing. Everybody essentially receives the same thing. So whether you're the person in charge of the kibbutz, whether you're cleaning the kibbutz, whatever you're doing, you receive the same salary. Your children, you have received the same type of housing. Your children have the same educational opportunities. So it's really the sort of collective living situation. Back in the early days, it was really, really collective. People even shared, clothing would all go into a communal wash, and then you pull out the shirt that you're going to wear that day. Those things have changed as Israel has certainly changed and moved far away from the socialist country it was when it was set up. But the kibbutz for me was really a fascinating way, because you're part of something that's larger than yourself. It's hard to identify with a city really, or with a nation, and your family is a very small thing to identify with. But I think we as humans, this group of a few hundred people, a clan or a tribe or something, is something that I think is to some degree hardwired into us. And this idea of being strong, there's a strong volunteer aspect to the kibbutz. You have extra work, and you're working for the communal good, not for your own, not for yourself. I think that there's a very attractive element to that, especially in a world that we live somewhat isolated lives in cities very often, and we've become very materialistic. So the kibbutz was a little bit of a departure for that. And I think that I learned a lot of lessons there, especially about volunteerism and about the idea of building community and doing things that are for the good of the community, that I think that we use the lessons that I learned and things that I learned on the kibbutz at the JCC.
I have to ask, what was the product you guys so successfully sold into market?
Chocolate milk.
Lovely.
Very famous chocolate milk in Israel. If you go to Israel, chocolate milk from Yot Vatah, from my kibbutz, the best chocolate milk in the world.
Well, it kind of is an element of the kibbutz as well, of making the desert bloom. That was a huge part of the whole project of the nation of Israel. I mean, was that, do you think the decline of the kibbutzes was economic in a lot of sense, or was it just,
It's interesting. It's an interesting type of lifestyle, but when you buy into it, when you opt in. Mm-hmm. So if you say, a bunch of your friends are going to go out and start something and you're all going to share and build something together, that's very attractive. But when you start to have second generation and third generation and they're growing up, especially in my kibbutz, which was more isolated in the middle of the desert, and as Israel has changed, so if the kibbutz, when the kibbutz is you have the standard of living you have in the kibbutz, and then the country itself is not very rich, then you're not jealous, so to say, of the people in the city. But as Israel has become this spectacularally successful, high-tech focused country with a lot of people exactly. So people are like, wait a minute, I want to go, and I also want to go do just my startup and sell it to Google. Mm-hmm. What
am I doing in the desert? Basically, that's the question.
Exactly.
Right? Let's go to the city.
It's tough. I think the kibbutz movement really belonged much more to a different time when the country was just being founded and it was very poor, and they were trying to all these immigrants coming in from all over the world and from the Arab countries in the 50s, and this was really the sort of the heyday of the kibbutz movement.
One more thing before we let you go, Jonathan, just to go back to the beginning of our conversation in part one, actually, to bring things full circle, back to the Krakow Jewish Festival, again, June 22nd to July 1st. Any particular highlights for you or things you especially look forward to during the festival?
I always like the concerts. So we're right next to Temple Synagogue, which has all, the sort of the concerts every night, which are always a focus for me. I think the festival has really evolved. People used to call it a klezmer festival, and that's still part of it, but it's gone and grown much beyond that. It's hundreds of events and workshops and dance and music and films and book releases, and there's just a ton of stuff going on. I think in our building, in the week or so, we'll have probably 80 or 90 events just as a partner of the festival. So I love all of it. To me, my favorite part of the festival is just the atmosphere. It turns, it feels like the center of the Jewish world, and the center of Krakow is really, for that week, absolutely focused on Kazimierz.
Isn't the final night concert, there's probably a better name for it, I don't know what it's called, the concert, the grand finale, I guess.
Shalom on Shiroka.
Shalom on Shiroka.
Is a better name.
That
is a much better name than mine. Isn't that live on Polish national television?
It is, and it's a huge concert of about 20,000 people.
Massive.
What we do the night before, it's something interesting. We have a Shabbat dinner we hold every week at the JCC. We have a community Shabbat dinner, and it's up to 100, 150 people. But during the festival, we have a really huge one. We do it in Stara Zajezdnia. We do it in the old tram depot here in Kazimierz. And I think this year...
Great location.
Yeah, this year I think we're expecting about 700. Last year was about 630, and that'll be the largest Shabbat dinner in Krakow since the war.
Whoa.
Impressive. jcckrakow.org is the website. Have a look. Jonathan Ornstein, thank you very much for joining us on KrakCast.
Thank you, fellas.